So it's time to add a date input, so to say. And for that, I'll add a row widget here below this first text field, because this amount text field actually doesn't need an entire row. The amount is typically pretty short. We don't need to use the entire row here. Instead, I want to use a part of that row, and the other part should be used by the date input. So therefore here, this row takes its children parameter, and the first child that's added here is the text field. The second child after the text field will be that date input. But here we don't have a built-in input that we could use. Instead, we kind of have to build our own input here, but thankfully, as you'll see, that will be quite straightforward, no worries. To add this date input here, I'll start by adding a sized box here to add some spacing between this amount text field and that date input. Let's say 16 pixels. And then next to that, another row, which I want to use to group two other widgets, which then together form the date input together. And since we here have a row inside of a row, and that would cause problems, we should already wrap this with expanded. And we will actually have to do the same for the text field, because text field turns out to be a widget which has problems with being placed in a row like this, because it also wants to take as much space horizontally as possible, and the row by default doesn't restrict the amount of space that can be taken, and that therefore causes problems when Flutter tries to render this combination on the screen. Hence, we also should wrap text field with expanded to make sure that it takes as much space as it can get on the screen, but nothing more. So we need to wrap this around text field and also around row here. With that, inside of this inner row, I want to have a text widget, which we'll use to show the currently selected date. So for the moment, I'll just say selected date here as a placeholder. And after this text field here, I want to display an icon button, which can be pressed to open a date picker. So an overlay that can be used for selecting a date. This icon button here needs an icon. And for this, we can create a new constant icon here with icons calendar month, which is a fitting icon I want to use here. And in addition to setting the icon, of course, I also want to set on pressed to make sure that I register a function that will be triggered when this icon button is pressed. And I'll get back to that function logic in just a second. With all that though, if you save that and force a reload, and you click this add button, you should see something like that. It's not 100% finished yet, but you see that the amount and this date input combination here sit in the same row and take up an equal amount of space here. Now indeed here for the date inputs, it would be nice if they would be pushed all the way to the right here. And to achieve this, we can go to this row that contains this text and icon button. And there we can set the main axis alignment, which in a row controls the horizontal alignment, and set this to main axis alignment and to push the content to the end of the row, like this. We can also add the cross axis alignment and set this to cross axis alignment center to center the content vertically. Now, if you want to do that or not is something that's up to you, but you can do that as well. With that, I do have the basic user interface I want to have here, and we now of course have to make sure that when we press this calendar icon button here, we actually do open such a date picker that allows the user to pick a date. For that, we have to work on that function that's passed as a value to onPressed on this date icon button, and I'll set this function up as a separate method here in my state class. It does not matter if you define it in front or after this dispose method here. Here I'll define it in front of it. And I'll name it %datePicker because that is what we do in this method here. We want to show that date picker. Now therefore it's this %datePicker method that should be used as a value for this icon button here. So this anonymous function can be replaced with a pointer at this _%datePicker function here. And inside of this function, or inside of this method to be precise, we now want to show such a date picker. And this can be done by using Flutter's showDatePicker method. Now before, in the expenses start file, you already saw showModalBottomSheet, which was a built-in function. Now you see showDatePicker, which is another built-in function supported by Flutter. Just like showModalBottomSheet, which wanted a context, showDatePicker also wants a context. But in addition, it also needs an initial date, so basically the date that is selected initially when the picker is opened. Then the first date that can be selected, so the lowest possible date, so to say, and the last date, so the maximum date that can be selected. Now to get all these dates, I'll create a new helper variable, or a final helper variable to be precise, which I'll call now, which is simply datetime now. And this should be my initial date. So my initial date is simply today, created with datetime now, because initial date, just like first date and last date, all want datetime values. So therefore here I created a datetime and used this as an initial date. For the first date, I then want to create a new datetime by calling the datetime constructor function like this, and by now manually passing a year, month, and date to it. And for the year, I want to use now.year, so on this datetime object, which now is, since we created it with this datetime constructor, you can access various pieces of information with help of all these properties. For example, the year property to get the year of the date here, so of the now date, so the current year therefore. And I want to deduct 1 from it by using this minus operator. So this gives me the current year minus 1. Then the next value you have to set here on the datetime constructor function is the month. And here I'll use now.month, so the same month, but 1 year ago. And the last value I want to set is now.day, so the day of this date here. So basically I'm setting the first date to today minus 1 year. And for the last date, I will now simply use now again, so today. So that my initial date and the last possible date I can set is now, but the first possible date, the oldest date that can be set, is now minus 1 year. And with that, if you save everything and you force a reload, you should be able to open this overlay and click this date picker button here, and now you get this date picker overlay presented on the screen, and here you can navigate between years and the different months in a year, and then pick any date of your choice and confirm this. And of course, at the moment, we're not doing anything with that confirmed value, but that's how we can show the picker. But of course, now we also want to store that picked date.